On the island of Newfoundland, upon the southwest coast, lies the little town of Virgil, to whom I'll sing this toast. There are so many highlands that lie just off her shore, and when the cold north wind blows, you can hear the billows roar. The people from the village make their living from the sea. They like their independence. It shows that they are free. Some fish in their small boats in the wind, the rain and sleet, while others make their living on the offshore trawler fleet. They've known their share of tragedies down through the years, and when the memories overcome, they show their grief with tears. For they have lost some loved ones to the furies of the seas, for heartaches and heartbreaks are locked in memories. This village has got beauty carved on its rugged shore. 7 miles of pure white sand. Who could ask for more? The mountains and the valleys where the rivers run so fast, and the salmon rise to the sportsman's fly as he makes another cast. Tell the people of this village love their native home, for anyone who goes away most surely will return. Just like that lifelong mystery, the answer you won't know. What makes this rugged village burn so deeply in your soul? What makes this rugged village burn so deeply in your soul?
Good evening, and welcome to This Week in Review. Tonight in our stories we have Halloween night, water treatment plant announcement, our MHA Calvin Parsons. Please stay tuned for these stories after this. Try your luck and play TV bingo on Wednesday, sponsored by the Burgeo Academy. Cards are 6 for $5 and can be bought from any student of Burgeo Academy or in most stores around town. Friday was Halloween. The children dressed up in their costumes in the afternoon as a dance was held for them at Burgeo Academy. This was sponsored by the Student Council. Students from kindergarten to 12 were in the gym dressed in a wide variety of costumes, along with some of the staff. The weather for Halloween was not very nice. It was rain and windy. In spite of it, the children were still seen out doing their trick-or-treating. At our door, we had seen 11. I also visited the senior complex, as some of the residents there were handing out their treats. I hope everyone had a good time and enjoyed your Halloween, and remember to check all treats before eating them. Residents of the town of Burgeo will soon have access to better quality drinking water. The Honorable Dave Denine, Minister of Municipal Affairs at that time, was in Burgeo to announce provincial funding to complete a water treatment plant. I am extremely pleased to be in Burgeo to announce funding for a state-of-the-art water treatment facility, said Minister Denine. As a part of the treatment system, this facility will use own-zone technology to ensure Burgeo residents have access to clean and safe drinking water for years to come. Minister Denine also stated that now that all the required funds have been secured, limited construction can begin this fall with an anticipated completion date of spring 2010. He also thanked the residents for their patience in this matter, and along with them, the provincial government certainly looks forward to this facility becoming a reality.
Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to be here today to announce provincial government's decision to provide the town of Burgeo with $549,000 to complete the water treatment plant. As you're all aware, this has been a long time coming. The devastating fire of 2004, when the plant was almost completed, the setback was considerable, and there have been many issues around the project since then. But all of that is behind us now, ladies and gentlemen, and we now focus on moving forward and completing this facility for the benefit of all residents of Burgeo. The government of Newfoundland is committed to ensuring Newfoundland and Labradorians have access to clean and safe drinking water. This plant will ensure that this is the case for the residents of Burgeo. At the end of this project, Burgeo will have a $3.3 million state-of-the-art water treatment facility that will enable all residents to confidently drink the water from the taps in which they have in their homes, which will be clean and clear. Mayor Reid, I'd like to present you with now an opportunity to say a few words.
Well, I think we should give him Thank you, Minister Nine. On behalf of the Council and people of Burgeo, we appreciate that, sir, and it's what we've been hoping for, as you know, for the past 8 years. Of course, we ran into some trouble. There was no fault of anyone's, but now that we finally come to a stage where we're going to get clean water for people of Burgeo, I'm sure everyone will appreciate that, sir, at the end of the day.
And it's my pleasure to be here, and I want to recognize my colleague in the House of Assembly, Calvin Parsons, the member for this area. Calvin, welcome. Bad day we came down here, but I got to say, this is not my first time in Burgeo. My first time was when Alistair was the mayor, and I got to say, I was hoping we'd have a nice day, but as the mayor pointed out, we're bringing water. So I think that's a good thing to do. So your community is beautiful. I've had a tour before, and we're going to look around before I go back. And I'm only too delighted to be able to come down to Burgeo to make this announcement, because I know the MHA is speaking to me. I know the mayor and council spoke to me out to the federation meetings, and I heard your concerns. I know they want it done quicker. I tried to push it as fast as I could. I know there's issues, and I know people who were around council before and residents of Burgeo are certainly going to look forward to this, and deservedly so. It's a long time coming, and it's only my pleasure to be able to come down to announce this today for you guys, and listen, all the best to you. And again, to be here in Burgeo, it's my pleasure, let me tell you, to be in such a beautiful community. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm just going to say one thing. He's a man of his word, because about a year ago, Dave and I saw him, and he said that he would get this project done. Would take time, and of course today he's pulled through on it, and we're getting a bit impatient, but these things take time, and so I'm really glad, and thank you very much.
Our MHA Calvin Parsons came by the studio for an update on his district. Good evening. In our studios tonight we have our MHA, Mr. Calvin Parsons. Good evening.
Good evening. Nice to be here again.
Yeah, so what's your purpose of the visit today?
I came down today, earlier today, of course, Minister Dave Denine, the Minister of Municipal Affairs, was in town to announce the funding for the new water system. So I came down to take part in that official announcement earlier today.
Oh, I see.
It's, if I might comment as well, it was good to see. Everyone knows, of course, who lives here. We've been almost 8 years now trying to get the proper water system. And before we had the first one completed, which was approved going back as early as 2000, I believe, we had the fire in 2004. And once that happened, there were a number of different parties involved, the engineers and the contractors and the town. And the issue was, of course, who was at fault, what insurance company should pay for the losses, and so on. So as a result of that, the thing could be tied up in the court system for years and years. So the first step was to convince the provincial government to come on side and say, look, while that's unraveling in the courts, let's proceed to go ahead with a new system, because that's ultimately, we need a new system anyway. And the town just couldn't wait to until the court case finished to do that. So it started, it was approved some time ago to go to phase 1. We ran into some issues about the thing came in over budget. And in the last 4 or 5 months, there's been lots of phone calls back and forth between the council here, the mayor, myself, municipal affairs, finally to the point where the minister today did come to Burgeo and announce that the project will proceed and that the funding is being made available. And I understand they hope to go to tenders now before in the fall, so that work can start pretty well immediately.
Oh, very good. So what other things are on the go for the district?
A whole bunch of stuff in the district, of course. The number 2 priorities I had going back a year ago during the election, number 1 was the completion of the water system in Burgeo, and that looks like it's finally been done. And the other one on the other end of the district was the bridge up in the Allamort area called Allamort River, but it actually services everybody who uses the coastal route up there called 470. Rose Blanche, Burnt Islands, Margaree, Allamort, and Port of Ass, and so on. So that's been done. In fact, as we speak, I believe the contractors are packing up their gear and moving out this week, so that's been on go all summer. And we had the Burgeo Road done earlier the year, about $1 million of road work on the beginning of the road. And of course, we had the completion of the facility, the terminal facility here in Burgeo, which will service the coastal ferries. So there's been a lot happening, and notwithstanding that it's been pretty tough around the province to get construction companies to do the work, because there's been a lot of work on the go, we've been pretty successful in these projects. Not only were they approved, but it looks like they'll be completed in this year. And now the water project, of course, is not slated for final approval or final completion until the spring of 2010. But the other projects that we did have on the burner, they are in fact will be completed this year in 2008.
Very good. So what did you think of the federal election we just had?
Probably, I guess people are getting pretty tired of elections. That's the 3rd federal election we've had in 6 years, I believe, and we had a provincial election last October. So I guess people are probably fed up with elections, and we got to go through municipal elections now next September, I do believe, in 2009. So there's lots of elections on the go. Pretty expensive, no doubt. It costs millions and millions of dollars to have these, and we really didn't get any significant change. The Conservatives got more seats than they had prior to the election. The Liberals have less, but we're still in a minority government situation. So in terms of the stability that would have come from a majority government, regardless of who the party was, we still don't have that stability. And we've got to see on a go-forward basis now if the other parties, the Liberals and the Bloc and the NDP, are going to be continuing to threaten to bring down the government, which was the case for the last 2 years. That will certainly mean that we have an unstable situation if that continues. I doubt if it will continue, because the option, of course, to bringing down the government again, the federal minority conservative government, is another election. And I don't think the people of Canada, quite frankly, want to have another election anytime soon. And I don't think it's advisable, given the situation we're in now economically, that instead of squabbling certainly over partisan political issues, this is a time when whoever the government is, they have to knuckle down and handle the economy, because by all accounts we're going to be in for a tough time in the next year or two, given the way that the global markets are collapsing and the money crunches and so on. So it's not a time for any more elections. I would think that instead of being unstable, we need to be stable. And hopefully, albeit we have a minority government situation, hopefully that stability will be there.
Okay. So what do you think of the ABC campaign during this election?
Again, I guess the Premier had his reasons for doing it. I didn't think it was wise from the beginning. It's easy to pick a fight with Ottawa, and we've done that quite often in the past, regardless of, again, what party was in government. It might have been the Peckford government, it might have been the Clyde Wells government, and now the Williams government. But it always seems from time to time that we have a reason to be fighting with Ottawa. I don't think at the end of the day it proved anything. And we had this so-called ABC campaign on the go for about 2 years. It was working and functional and operative during the election campaign. We end up with no Conservative member in government, which means we don't have a cabinet minister. And I think that's a shame, really. I think we're going to miss a lot of things. We will get our ordinary, usual things that we get from a federal government. We will get our funding, for example, under transfer payments. We will get our funding under social programs. We will get our continued funding for things like Marine Atlantic. And we will get our continued funding for like RCMP, policing, and stuff like that, and programs that are standard programs. But there's a lot of stuff that happens at a cabinet table that won't happen now if we don't have someone there, or if we're represented by someone who is not a Newfoundlander. And I say that because in the past, government, Peter MacKay was a minister representing Nova Scotia, but he also represented PEI, which didn't have a Conservative member. And it's common sense. I mean, that cabinet minister, in his case, he looked after Nova Scotia first, and he's not there to go. And once he looks after Nova Scotia, he might not get equal time at the cabinet table to push the concerns of Prince Edward Island. So if he's going to be our regional minister this time around, I fear that there's going to be a lot of what I call one-off things that we won't get. For example, if we have a major crisis in the fishing industry and we need to have a particular government program applied to deal with it, like in the days when we had tags, for example, or if we have a particular crisis, there was a crisis, for example, when Hibernia was first started up and it didn't get finished. We at that time had a cabinet minister, John Crosbie, who was capable and had the clout at the cabinet table to get the federal government to put in the funds to make sure that Hibernia happened. That's the kind of major one-off things that we're not going to have right now. And I think a couple of things that I see on the burner that might or might not happen because of that is the Lower Churchill, for example. There's been talk that the provincial government will want the federal government to guarantee or bankroll to some extent the development of the Lower Churchill. Now, is that likely to happen when we don't have a cabinet minister? I think we just made that a lot tougher to do given this situation. I don't believe for a minute that these two gentlemen, the Premier and the Prime Minister, are at each other's throats for 2 years. And all of a sudden, simply because the Premier says the next day, well, the fight is over for me. I don't think life is like that. And I think that's pretty simplistic. I think that, albeit the Premier might have said that it's over, the question is, how is the Prime Minister going to react now? He has no reason to be nice to us anymore. He's seen what's happened. He's seen the worst case scenario that could happen from us as a province, and that is that he got no MPs out of here. So I don't think it bodes well for us as a province at all, unfortunately. And I think it was a foolish game. It was unnecessary. And quite frankly, I've always been a firm believer that you accomplish more with sugar than you do with vinegar. And it's fine to get your back up sometimes and stand up for your case. That's one thing. But you can stand up for your province without necessarily harming your province in the process. And I think we will see in the next 3 or 4 years during the life of this minority government that the ABC campaign was probably harmful to us.
Okay, very good. So when is the House Assembly expected to be open again?
Normally it opens the week following the November the 11th Remembrance Day ceremonies, and I believe this year that's on a Tuesday, November the 11th, which means it would have normally opened on the 17th of November. However, I understand the Premier is about to shuffle his cabinet within the next day or two or the next week or so. So it may be even the 24th of November before it opens, and that will allow the new ministers a time to get briefed on their various departments and get up to speed, because once the House opens, those ministers have to be subjected to question period every day. So they have to get some homework done between now and the time the House would open, so that they're up to speed and can answer these questions properly. The session in the fall is usually the shorter session anyway. The spring session deals with the budgets, and the session usually runs from mid-March until the middle part of June. The fall session usually runs from mid-November till about just the week before Christmas. So we will have about 4 weeks, I would think, and that session only deals with legislation. It's not that it's not as important, but it's not as detailed a session as it is in the spring, because in the spring you're dealing with budgets and estimates meetings and so on, as well as legislation, whereas in the fall session you're primarily dealing only with legislation, and it's not as detailed.
Okay, very good. The official opening of the ferry terminal, has got any idea when that's going to happen?
I have no idea. In fact, I spoke to Minister Diane Whalen, who's the minister responsible for works and transportation in the province. I spoke to her when the House was in session back in the spring, because we knew it would be finished, and in fact we wanted it opened so that the summer tourist trade could take advantage of it. It did get opened a little bit later than we anticipated. It is a beautiful facility. It's certainly needed. We all know that, but we also know now that they did a fine job, and it is a fine job. I toured the facility. It's great for people who are going to be waiting for the ferry, need a place to use the washroom, or just get out of their car and stretch their legs and have somewhere to be, rather than sitting in their vehicle waiting for the coast boats and so on. So it's a very nice facility. She told me, the minister, that she was going to have an official opening. So I've still put that to her as recently as a couple of weeks ago again, and said, look, when are you proposing to do this? Because after a while, if it's been open so long, before you do an official opening, it sort of takes away from doing an official opening.
Yes.
So I was hoping that she could do it before Christmas, quite frankly. But again, that's up to her and up to her schedule when she wants to do that.
Okay, very good. Any news on the eco-ice system for our arena?
Actually, as you know, the money was approved back in the spring budget by the provincial government to do the eco-ice system, which, for those who don't already know, of course, and most people do, what the eco system would do is lengthen the period of time that the ice was available. You wouldn't be just subject to waiting for Mother Nature to decide when you were going to have ice. You would actually be able to freeze the ice yourself, and we were hoping to have ice from like the latter part of November until up into latter part of March or possibly April. The money was granted. They ran into some details and in the engineering piece about how to finish off the project. So I spoke to the town manager, and he tells me that as of yesterday, actually, which would have been the 28th of October, the engineers are putting that final piece of information together. That will be given to the people in the government offices in Corner Brook. The tender documents are all prepared, just waiting for this final few pieces of information, and then the tender will be called as soon as that information is available. So, as you know, it's very imminent that when the tender now should be called very shortly.
Also, is there any news on the cell phone coverage in the Burgeville Road area?
Actually, it's a good time to give an update on that, because and I'm actually going to read from a memo that I prepared myself, because it's kind of detailed. This is a question that I get asked not only by the people of Burgeo, but also, of course, the people from Ramia. Particularly, was there going to be cell phone coverage? The question was when and if there was going to be cell phone coverage on the Peter Strides area, and where people have cabins up along Route 480. Excuse me. This question gets asked every year. We go back and continue to try to get information, and we always got the runaround and didn't get any details. But finally, last spring, I hooked a meeting with a Mr. Trevor McLeod, who is the Vice President in Atlantic Canada with Alliant, who will be responsible for the cell phones. So now I've conveyed this information verbally to a lot of people. I have friends, of course, who have places in Peter Strides, and I've explained it to them. I've explained it to some individuals in Ramia, but maybe it's a good time to explain the whole thing, and rather than make any mistakes or not provide the information clearly, I'd actually like to read the memo so that there's no misunderstanding at all. With respect to Route 480, which is the Burgeo Road, and the South Coast in general, Mr. McLeod advises that right now there are approximately 21,000 minutes of cell phone usage per month for the town of Ramia. That is the second lowest site capacity in all of Atlantic Canada. The only other site in Atlantic Canada that is lower than Ramia is Gull Lake, which is actually a construction and mining site in this province. So in other words, of all the sites that there are for cell phones in Atlantic Canada, in the case of Ramia, it's 21,000 minutes per month, is the second lowest in Atlantic Canada. Mr. McLeod advised me, his words were, "We are losing money hand over fist in our Ramia location, and it might even come to having to consider closing it down." As a comparison, he told me that the average site uses approximately 500,000 minutes per month. So that's the average, is 500,000 per month. Ramia was only getting 21,000 per month. In the case of Burgeo, he said it wasn't much better. For the month that he picked, and what he did, he just went into his records and picked out a random month out of the 12 months in the year for Burgeo to see what the usage was, and it showed that Burgeo, the community of Burgeo, used about 77,000 minutes that month that he picked out at random. And Burgeo is typically in the bottom 10% of all users and all sites in Atlantic Canada. So when you look at the two communities, Ramia, 21,000 a month, Burgeo, 77,000 a month, the average in Atlantic Canada is 500,000. So just in the communities alone, he was very displeased with the amount of usage and said that it wasn't paying its way. He gave the information concerning Ramia and Burgeo to demonstrate that if these two communities themselves, the communities, are so unproductive and costly, the possibility of putting cell phone coverage in an even more remote, less populated area, such as Peter Strides and along Route 480, would obviously mean that there was no business case whatsoever for Alliant to even look at it. So in the past we've talked about we'd like to have it, why don't we have it, and why won't Alliant do it? But that's the background. Because to Alliant, and by the way, Alliant is not a government agency. Alliant is a private business, the same as Rogers Communications or Shaw Communications or Alliant or Bell or anybody else. They have to make a business case in order to do it. So what he's saying is those figures, 21,000 in Ramia, 77,000 in Burgeo, that's in communities. Don't come anywhere near the average in Atlantic Canada. Therefore, how could you ever justify spending the money to put a site and put coverage up on the Burgeo Road? Now, he told me as well that to install a site, it cost about $400,000 per site to install the equipment for a site. Now, because I was also looking at, we wanted coverage up on the other end of the district. We wanted it in Rose Blanche, we wanted it in Burnt Islands, and we wanted coverage in Alamort, which don't have cell phone coverage right now in those communities. In that case, because I thought he meant it would be $400,000 to cover off that Route 470 from Port aux Basques down to Rose Blanche. He said, no, it's $400,000 per site, and we would need 3 sites to cover off Alamort, Burnt Islands, and Rose Blanche. So we're looking at $1.2 million. That's up that end of her. He didn't even have a clue how many sites he might need to cover off Route 480. So, but he knew that it was going to be at least one, which was going to be $400,000, and there was no way that he could make a business case to justify putting such a site in to cover off the Burgeo Road. Now, I made all kinds of arguments with him. I suggested, for example, the safety issue. I said, we got people, traveling over here. We got ambulances, we have truckers, we have just the regular citizens who travel, we have tourists who travel, particularly in the winter months, and what if something happens on the highway? Well, he wasn't too sympathetic on that. And his answer, in fact, was to the effect that, well, look, we've been here for hundreds of years, and before we had roads and we never had any, there's always a safety risk, he said, and before we had the road there was always a safety risk as well. But he said that doesn't justify us, a private company, to do it. He said if the provincial government or the federal government were to say, here, we'll pay the full cost on doing this, not an issue, because then we don't have to make a business case. But he said the governments aren't into that business of doing it. It's private business, and we can't make the business case to do it. So unfortunately, that's where we sit right now on the cell phones. As nice as it would be to have, as convenient as it is, as necessary as it is from a safety point of view, Alliant aren't prepared to do it. And that's the only one who's providing any kind of coverage right now down in this area is Alliant. I also checked with the CRTC, which is the Canadian Radio and Telecommunications Corporation, and that is a federal government-created body which sort of oversees all of the utilities in Canada, whether it be cable, whether it be cell phone usage and telephone usage and television, and who does what and what the rules and regulations ought to be. We checked with them to see if there was any kind of pressure we could bring to bear to have Alliant be forced to provide a service in the area, and they say no. Look, the fact that Alliant is providing it in communities, there's no requirement that they must provide a service anywhere in the country. They're providing it to the community, and even then, they're only expected to do it on a business basis. The CRTC cannot force you or force a company to do it and lose money. So they won't get involved. So there's no pressure we can bring to bear with the CRTC. Alliant is saying no, and the provinces certainly aren't into the business of doing it as well. The other issue tied in with Route 480 and the cabin owners along Route 480, particularly in the Peter Strides area, was the issue of the bag phones. A lot of people have asked the question, well, what's going to happen? Again, Mr. McLeod explained that there's two kinds of service. There's an analog service and there's a digital service. And he says the bags that they were using was the analog bag phone. That will be terminated as of November the 16th, 2008, which is only about 2 weeks from today. It's what he called an end-of-life decision. The companies that provide the devices themselves, the bag phones and the necessary equipment to repair them, will no longer be making the equipment after that date, nor the repair materials that might be needed for any kind of repairs. He says analog usage at the present time is only about 2 to 3% of Alliant's total service, and the analog service is totally obsolete right now from their perspective. In fact, the company cannot continue to improve the digital service, which everybody's going digital with cell phones and so on. He said Alliant cannot continue to make improvements in their digital service if they're going to stay back and be tied up with having to repair and continue to provide the analog service. And he said every telecommunications company in the world is going digital as opposed to keeping their feet in the past and being grounded in analog. So he said there's no way that they're able to maintain the old analog service. Now, notwithstanding that the analog bag service will be terminating on November the 16th, he did say that there is and will continue to be, and he called it an M800 digital bag phone booster mechanism. So albeit the analog bag phones will be gone as of November the 16th, there's still a bag phone that you can get. That's a digital setup that you can have, that you can get to put in there at that time. And he says a lot of people in remote areas have already switched to those or are in the process of doing it, so that they're still left with some kind of coverage. So that's the situation on the analog bag phone as well.
Okay, very good. Is there anything else that you would like to add?
I just thank you again for allowing me the opportunity. It certainly gives me an opportunity to bring people up to speed on some of the issues that's happening, and to see people. Of course, I have a number of visits I have to do again while I'm here, and a lot of people like to have personal visits, and rather than come see at the town hall and so on. So there's always a few private visits that I had to go make. And again, I would encourage anyone who has any kind of issue. My phone numbers are posted in the Gulf News, which is distributed in this area every week. It's in the paper. It's also available at the town hall. It's a 1-800 number, so it doesn't cost anything that people need to speak to me about. By all means, feel free. I'm usually in St. John's a lot myself, but we do have a district office, and like I say, it's a toll-free number, so feel free to call, and we're more than happy to respond. And in fact, we pride ourselves on returning our phone calls, so by all means, keep the calls coming, and we're more than pleased to do whatever we can.
Okay, well, thank you so much for dropping by.
Thank you.
This concludes our programming for tonight. Thank you for watching. Good night.